welcome to the Singularity Computers Client Build 18 Q&A answers. How I'm going to do these Q&As from now on is I will remind you when I get to the final part of a build log to leave your questions, and then I'll answer them in another video. I was thinking about doing one per video, but I think one per build is going to be plenty, mainly with the amount of builds that I have coming up. Anyway, let's get to these questions. So it would be great to see a tutorial on how you get the Aquero, the fan curves, temperature ranges, etc. from Yoga Triathlete. I've actually already filmed it, and it'll come out probably after the Client Build 24 build log is finished. Have you considered doing live QAs via something like Twitch? Could be very interesting. Toza89. Yes, definitely. And actually, there's a lot I'm considering doing live, but it won't be until I get through this busy period that I'm in now. And I'm not sure when that'll be, probably a couple of months at least. Just working on product releases and other things. How do you choose between a 90-degree angle fitting between two pipes or a 90-degree bend? Do you ask the client if he objects more fittings and make a cost evaluation, or do you decide yourself? Dr. Ortmeyer. Yeah, it is about what the customer wants. So I just ask them, do they want more fittings or less fittings? If they're about having fittings for the bends, and instead of using monoblocks, having separate water blocks so that there's more fittings and more complexity, well, then I'll be using 90-degree fittings for the bends. But if they're about clean, understated, less complexity, monoblock, all of that, then as little fittings as possible and as much bending as possible. But there is really a limit to bending, and you can't push it too far or your bends just look terrible. So you need to be careful about that limit. And that limit might also be your own skill limit. But you do get to a point where it's beyond that, and it's a limit of the bending technique and the materials. Have you even considered doing a small form factor build without dedicated reservoir? Is it possible? I would love to do it in a Lee PC-05 or something similar. Any tips or tricks, George J? Absolutely. I love doing compact builds. Whenever I get the opportunity, I will. The reason I like it so much is because I'm extremely familiar with fittings, and it's one of the things that I guess that I'm best at it is in particular over anything else that I do, water cooling. And if you're going to build a compact water-cooled system, it is one of the most challenging things. And so for me, very, very enjoyable and something I'd love to do. But yes, without a dedicated reservoir, I was literally designing something yesterday and we got to the point where there wasn't enough space for the res, and we were like, okay, should we build a custom res, a rectangular one, and then I was just like, scrap the res, let's go back to what we used to do in the old days and have a T-line, which is just a T-fitting with a tube coming up to fill it. And then afterwards, you have to take that off. You might have to tip the system up or something. But when being compact is the priority, you're not worried about the ease of use of having a reservoir. So absolutely. And you are going to see me doing something more compact than you can imagine coming up soon. A project I'm working on right now. Running the math on your radium is what he means, computers. You charge $500 to $2,000 labor cost, depending on the complexity of the mods and components. This is on top of component cost. How would that $2,000 upper end compare to the cost of a client build like Client Build 18? Okay, that's about what I charge for something like Client Build 18, to be honest. We've never charged much for our builds, and that's because we love what we do, and it's for the channel. I should charge more. I really need to. It's important for Singularity Computers for me to charge more, and I have started to. But yeah, that is about all we have charged, in the recent past. and we end up going, way beyond what we were supposed to every time. So it's really hard for me to find this balance between passion and survival, because every time I just want to push further and further so people get incredible value out of our work. The best way to work it out is, this is the answer. This is somebody answering that question. The best way to work it out is, if I am correct, if your PC costs £10,000, labor will be another £10,000 plus shipping back to your country, but the work he does is definitely worth every penny. Usually it works out that with every single company, a 6 scale. Anyway, the point is, everyone thinks that we're way more expensive than we actually are. There's also the fact that our prices are in Australian dollars, and Americans don't understand other currencies a lot of the time. So people think that Australian dollars are just more expensive, but it's not the case. Same value as the American, so the value of the components is the same, compared to America. It's just a different currency. Although they do charge a little bit more for parts here, but by the time I buy from America and bring them into the country, it's the same. It's a matter of $100 or something for shipping, and yeah, it's the same. With the extreme cooling capacity of client build 18, and this applies to any similar build, is there a point in which radiator surface area just doesn't cut it? For example, imagine a single 480mm radiator is doing nothing but cooling a 6950X. Those chips aren't very good overclockers. You are damn right about that. So theoretically, if you want to achieve 4.5, which for the 6950X is about it, and you required 1.4 volts or more to achieve that, by the way, what I mean by it's about it, for a 24/7 stable, safe overclock, so 4.5 gigahertz, 1.4 volts on the 6950X. Would the 480mm radiator suffice? If so, could you theoretically push the CPU further and add another 480mm radiator to keep it cool, ignoring the dangers of pumping so much voltage into your CPU? Does radiator surface area scale linearly with temperatures of a single processor? In other words, at what point does radiator surface area become insufficient at cooling a single CPU or GPU? 2 times 480mm radiator for a CPU is huge cooling potential, but will there be a cooling bottleneck, if you will, somewhere else in the chain that thwarts the cooling potential and stops you from pushing the CPU really hard? That is an excellent point. And this is the biggest limitation of water cooling, and it's kind of a secret of water cooling. Water blocks, at least current water blocks, are the biggest weakness in a water cooling loop. The biggest limit by miles. I mean, we all build these amazing loops with huge amount of cooling capacity that could cool far more. I mean, 90% of water cooling systems, custom water cooling systems these days, are so over the top. They're probably 4 times more than you actually need. Finding the exact point is something you'd have to do through testing. It depends on radiator thickness, radiator specifications, FPI, the fan RPMs, the fan specifications, the ambient temperature. It depends on a lot of things, but I will say water blocks are very weak. It's the biggest weakness. The design needs to be worked on. The material needs to be worked on. It needs to be improved. And it really disappoints me that the technology has stagnated for so long. We haven't seen any changes since the beginning. I really want to see changes with water blocks. And I shouldn't say this, but I'm actually working on something that is going to make this change. I don't know if you'll ever see it. It depends on the success. So if you don't get what I'm saying, if your CPU is massively overclocked, 1.5 volts, 4.8 gigahertz, whatever, just for example, and it's 100% load, 90 degrees Celsius, put your hand on your CPU water block. And I mean, it's going to be hot, but it's not going to be 90 degrees. The heat transfer from the water blocks is the biggest weakness. So yes, absolutely, most water cooling loops are complete overkill. A 480mm radiator for the 6950X is about what I would do. And that is because I like to run my fans as quiet as possible. So, you know, with the 6950X, you could get away with less radiator capacity, but you need to have higher RPM fans to kind of make up for it. You know, you always go overkill so that you can have a more silent configuration. That was from Daniel West, by the way, that question. Very good question. Okay, Joep Adams, could you do a fan curve tutorial? Absolutely, coming up. Cooper, I'm thinking of using a plate heat exchanger to balance the temps between the CPU and the GPU loops. Do you think this is feasible? I realize while gaming the CPU loop is almost at idle with water temp 25 degrees while the GPU works so hard, 45 degrees or higher water temp. Now I had to come back and answer this question properly. I don't mean to offend anyone else who has been asking questions, but this is by far my favorite question. Now this may seem like a simple question and a lot of people may not even understand this question, but what it's actually pointing to is something that is, well, potentially very exciting, because if you have a dual loop system and one loop is cooling the GPUs, one loop is cooling the CPU, maybe the motherboard, the memory. Well, if you're using a seriously GPU intensive application that has the GPUs at 100%, but has the CPU at only, 10% or 5%, well then the GPU loop is going to become very hot, while the CPU loop isn't. And there might be a 10 to 15 degree difference there in the coolant temperatures between those two loops. So just imagine if you could tap into the cooling of the other loop, the loop that is not under strain, to help the loop that is under strain. But they're two separate loops. Obviously the fluid is not going to travel through, both of those loops at the same time. So how do you do it? So that's why he's talking about a heat exchanger plate. But this brings to mind a lot of incredible possibilities and things that I would love to do, I would love to experiment with. And it also really makes you think about whether you want to go for dual loops or a single loop, because if you go for a single, very powerful loop, if you combine all of those components that you are going to use for dual loops, so all of the radiators, both of the pumps, and you have one powerful loop, well, sometimes that can be even more effective. Although then you start to run into the bottleneck of a water cooling loop, which is the water blocks, which is something else that I've discussed in this video. Avenged CJ, since you went through the trouble of machining a custom water block for the RAID card, why not also make a backplate to hide the green PCB? Very good point. And it's not something that we thought about at the time. You need to understand how much time goes into designing something, having it drawn up in CAD, having the machine paths programmed, having the thing prototyped. I mean, you have to build a few prototypes. You're always going to make a few little errors. Maybe something is half a mil out, like a mounting hole. And, you have to have it CNC machined, you have to have it plated. And, all of that takes a long time. And this should have obviously been thought about at the very beginning. It's just something that we overlooked. We should have picked it up to begin with. But I was going on customer requests, although later when he saw the comments about that, he did kind of regret it and say, geez, we should do one, but it's kind of too late because, he needed the build. But for a future upgrade, if that system comes back, that's something that I'll likely do. Okay. Ken Mason, I've been looking closely at the Thermaltake Core P5 for a custom loop, which you've used in a few builds. I'm struggling to understand the airflow for this chassis. There's no filter before the fans pushing into the radiator. There's a seemingly useless filter after the radiator. The radiator is pumping hot air into the enclosure where your hard drive and wire routing is, with no visible escape. There's no forced air over the motherboard. None of that sounds good. Can you explain why I shouldn't care about that stuff, or if these are legit concerns? Now, I don't want to put anyone down. I love every bit of tech on the market. Thermaltake's done a great job with this case. I've really enjoyed building into it, but there are a few design flaws with it. But for me, the main ones were wire routing, but that's a whole different subject. So there's a few questions here, and this is such a great comment that there's so many angles to this. But okay, so there's no filter before the fans. Well, that just depends on how you set it up. So if you're worried about having a filter, personally I'm not, I'll talk about that in a sec, then you will need to make the most of the filter, you will need to draw air from the back. Then you won't be blowing hot air into the back where the hard drive is either. You'll be actually taking the air from there. So that will also solve that problem. As for the motherboard, if you're water cooling, you don't need airflow. I mean, it's good to still have some, but convection is more than enough, mainly in an open case design. Everyone underestimates convection. It's a very powerful force. Just convection is plenty to create airflow around the components and keep everything cool. And with water cooling, as I say, you don't really need that anyway. So as for the dust filter, I find that it just slows the dust down, the dust still gets in. So what you end up achieving is instead of doing 4 dust cleans a year, you do 3. So for me, why would you destroy the aesthetics of your build just to make that little change? It's not a big enough difference to make, it's not a meaningful enough difference to destroy the aesthetics of your build. Then again, if you can have dust filters without seeing them and they're not ugly, I have absolutely no problem with that. And if you configure that case how I said, then you will achieve that. But the only thing is I've configured it with the fans blowing the other way because I prefer to see the fan blades. For me it was about the aesthetics and I wasn't too worried about the rest. Quadgord, how did you go about starting your company and where did you get the money to keep it going? Brilliant questions. These are things I've always wanted to talk about. I know what you said in earlier videos that you take it out of your own pocket. I've been watching you for about 2 years and I have to say I'm truly inspired by your work and your enthusiasm towards your company. Even though it hasn't always gone the way you've planned, you've still kept going. Your builds and videos are one of the reasons I want to build systems and want to work with them. Thank you so much for your videos and the time you put into showing your builds. So how did I start? Well, I really want to make a video dedicated to this because it's really important. And if people hear this story, they can do the same thing. And they can be successful and they can live their dreams. But I can tell you it wasn't easy. I started with nothing. And I started a repair business from the ground up. And I would ride my bike around and do letterbox drops. That's how I started, letterbox drops, riding my bike around, and at that point in time I had surgical drains hanging out of me and a ileostomy bag and riding around in the 35-degree heat. But within a few months I had some customers and I built a client base within a year that was enough to keep me going. And within 3 years I had 3 people and I was doing very, very well. I was also selling custom builds and, mostly entry-level office systems and things, but it was a great little business and I really loved it. And I was really proud of what I built, but I had to give all of that away when I got really sick again. And it was when I was told that I had 6 months to live that I decided to start this channel because this is what I wanted to do in the time I had left. Everyone said don't do it, you're going to get trolled because there's so many trolls. I've just experienced the exact opposite. It's been the best thing I've ever done. How have I kept going? Well, it's been very hard. It's very hard to make money doing this. It's a very high stakes business. It's all reputation based. One little mistake and it'll kill your sales. So extremely high stakes, very, very risky. And I've used a lot of different strategies. I have my products now and there's enough things that we're doing to keep us going, but it is not easy and we've been very close to the edge for a long time. And I really look forward to getting ahead a little bit and being able to just relax slightly so that I can start to have some fun again. Put it this, I was doing just fine. until somebody stole everything that I had in 2015. And since then I've been rebuilding, and it hasn't been easy. Before that I had lots of savings from when I ran my repair business, and I started working in high school. I started my first business. It's a long story. I really need to go into it because I think that this story is, it could inspire people to do the same thing and live amazing lives. Did you find any noticeable difference running the GPU loop in parallel rather than series? From maybe JB. No. Once it was up and running and the air was out of the loop, because that took a lot longer. So it depends if you're... Okay, so this is probably definitely referring to temperatures. No, I didn't notice a difference. I think I didn't actually test it, but from experience, it might have been a couple of degrees. And that could have been solved with a more powerful pump configuration, dual pumps. If you're going to do more than 2 components in parallel, then I suggest a couple of DDCs or a couple of D5s, mainly if you have a lot of other components in the loop. Do you plan on selling any custom water blocks you make on these builds, even if we need to order them rather than the site having stock? So would it still be a nice addition? And what we can get made from you, big companies don't make blocks for everything after all. From Odd Nilsson. I shouldn't talk about my plans for the future because there are powerful forces working against us that don't want us to rise up. And yeah, if I talk about it, they're going to know what my plans are, and I don't want them to. I want you guys to know, but it's not just you guys watching. What bits power black sparkle fittings do you use to connect the 2 video cards together? I'm planning on adding a second card to my system and using the top 2 PCI slots on an Asus board. So I believe the spacing will be the same. Yoga triathlete again. Okay, well, most of the time I just use the same hardline compression fittings that I use throughout the loop. But what did I use in client build 18? That's right, I used 1-inch D-plugs. There are a few different D-plug sizes. I think there's actually 3. But the 1-inch D-plug fits perfectly for that spacing. That's really what it's designed for. So that's the name of the fitting. You can search that and you'll be able to find it. Question, do you prefer using glass reservoir or plastic? Is there any difference in using either one? Techno Kitty. Glass has a higher chemical resistance, so it's going to last longer. It has less chance of staining. Maybe the clarity is better. It has a kind of a different clarity, but other than that, there's no real difference other than knowing that you have, that higher quality material, but it's not really necessary, no. But, I would like to have glass reservoirs. It might be something that I do. It's just I haven't done it at this point because it was restrictive to the design that I wanted to have. So I went for, the function instead of having glass with Protium, which is my reservoir. Questions. When you are measuring hard tubing for fittings, do you have a system for getting precise results, or do you kind of do it by eye? Okay, I'll answer that first. There's just no precise way of doing it, but I use a ruler. I eye up the angles most of the time, but I do have a spirit level that I use, but I normally use that after the tube is in to make sure. Most of the time I get it perfect by eye, but sometimes there's an optical illusion, like there's something else on an angle near it that's kind of throwing you off, and that's when I'll use a spirit level because I'm very fussy about all of the tube being right. It's very important to me that it is. But yeah, a lot of it is guesswork. You measure what you can, get a small ruler so that you can fit it right in there. But yeah, it's trial and error. You're going to go through a lot of extra tube. I'd buy double the amount of tube that you actually need because it's not easy, mainly if you're bending, because you get an exact measurement. And by the way, I use the piece of silicon a lot of the time when there's bends and actually bend it into shape and fit it to where the tube is going to go. And that's usually quite accurate. In your experience, where would be the most common areas you would find leakage if it happens at all? I love this. This is from Bonsai431. Okay, I will tell you where I've seen the most leaks come from in my 15 years of experience, and it's always from an acrylic on acrylic thread, which is reservoirs. Reservoirs where they attach to the pump tops, reservoir caps, and that's because an acrylic thread often acrylic on acrylic feels like it's tight when it's not. So, you'll be tightening it up and it goes click, 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 and you think, oh, that feels really, really tight. But it turns out it's not even up against the O-ring yet, because that's just kind of what acrylic does, and it's difficult to machine. It cracks, and it's difficult to manufacture. But yeah, tops and bottoms of reservoirs where the pumps attach to reservoirs, it's never fittings. I mean, I never see it from fittings. But yeah, I've had that maybe over the past 15 years, 4 or 5 times happen to me. It's never usually a problem though, because I always place paper towels and they always save me. Okay, question 3. Is this build in particular looking behind the motherboard tray? You were using some sort of plastic clamp to support the tubing from the radiator. What is that clamp? I can't actually tell you what it is, but I picked it up from Performance PC. It's in the DIY section for attaching. It's actually for cable management, and I've just broken a part off it because it actually comes with like 8 of those pieces. When working out max amperage per fan header on a motherboard, do you use the peak value or the median? Is it safe to go over the peak if it's a tiny bit? Thanks for doing this. No, I would actually stay back from the peak if you can. I mean, I would stay right away from it. Give it a little margin just to be safe. Because I have a very long time ago gone over the peak, and if you're close to the peak, if you're just a bit over, sometimes things work properly, sometimes they don't. I want to say more about all of this, but I just have to get on with it. I've been watching for a long time. A question always itches me. What were your thoughts on the SR2 EVGA dual socket motherboard? If something like that would have been available today, as in consumer board, not Supermicro server boards, would you still like working on it? Hell yeah, absolutely. And I never actually got the chance to build a system with that board, and I was very disappointed about that. That was kind of back in the golden days for me. There were some amazing parts back then, and that was definitely one of them. I'm an avid PC builder when it comes to budget PCs, 5 to 10 a month. Whoa, all from 200 to 900 US max. And I rarely have the opportunity to work with hardware as premium as yours. I personally dislike hard tubing and phones, and trying to find cheaper ways to do custom loops. I love hard tubing, and I was one of the first to use it because of that. The thing that a lot of people don't consider about hard tube is all of the problems that we had in the early days with coolant and with fluid in general. If it was just deionized or distilled water, if it was just coolant, clogging, corrosion, all of that. Not many people know that most of that came from soft tube. Plasticizer, the tube breaks down very quickly, and that causes clogging. Causes corrosion too, because it changes the chemicals in the loop, and just that's what a lot of people don't consider about soft tube. You have to be careful. But these days it's been much improved. Using good coolants, with biocide and corrosion inhibitors, you can pretty much get away with anything these days. Great vid. Please don't do black and white. Corey Marinello. What's wrong with black and white? I don't know. The reason I do it is because people were going on about my teeth at one point. Not that I care what people say, but it's true. I have bad teeth. It's from chemotherapy. It just wrecked all of my teeth. Actually, I have teeth like falling out from it. Okay, from Flattest Pancake. I'm new to the PC Master Race. Is the pump powered directly by the power supply? And if so, does that mean I have to turn off the power supply to stop the loop, or is it connected to the motherboard? The pump is always going to be powered by the power supply directly. Maybe not, you could have a splitter or something, but I'm a minimalist. I like to connect it directly whenever I can. You can actually run it straight into the power supply if you use the right header and get the right pin out, but I suggest having Molex in between so that you can externally power your pump easily, which is very important. When you're filling your loop, you need to have your pump externally powered. You don't want to be switching the system on and off as you're filling your loop, and you also don't want that danger, if there's a leak, of having the system powered on. But yeah, it's actually connected to the motherboard as well. The PWM control or RPM readout will run to the motherboard, unless you're using something like the Aquero. Scott Davis, I'm looking to sleeve my SAS cables like in build 18. What size sleeving did you use for the 2 sections of cable? Thanks. MDPC-X SATA sleeve. MDPC has 3 sizes. They have small, front panel, and SATA. Ahamoth, Jack Irving. Advice with cutting long wires all to the same length. I'm currently practicing custom sleeve on super long wires. I sort of struggled to get them all at the same length off the bat. I noticed that each and every cable is at perfect length. What is the method you use to ensure uniformity? I've seen people set up jigs and different things to try to get this absolutely perfect. What I do is straighten the wire first just by dragging my finger along it. I make sure it's very straight. And I use the same wire, the first length, to measure up against each of the other wires. I don't measure them on a ruler. I actually get the first wire with the correct length and I draw them both out right next to each other really tight, and then I cut it to length. You need to be careful how you do that. You have to stick with that first wire, otherwise you might introduce an error that just gets carried on and gets worse and worse. It's kind of slow the way I do it. I should set up a jig to improve productivity, but I'm just thinking about quality. I'm not really thinking about efficiency ever. Secondly, making fan extensions. I have 16 fans in my case right now. If I add more radiators, that will increase. I want all of my fan cables to terminate flush. As a beginner to modding, I'm not yet comfortable replacing the fan cables as you have. Do you have advice for an alternative? I can absolutely understand your apprehension. This is an excellent question, because custom cables are difficult enough, but when you're dealing with smaller wire gauges, it just allows for error. You need to be so much more careful. You think ATX crimps need to be perfect, wait until you do fan crimps. If you make one little mistake, you're going to have just the most incredible problems, and they are so difficult to pinpoint, mainly when you have an Aquero and so many different components, you just don't know where that problem is. And tracing it later, you have the loops filled, you might have to get in behind them, you have to empty everything. It is a real nightmare. If you're going to ever take it on, just make sure you get those crimps perfect, and you're very fussy and OCD about all of it. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of problems. You can never be, slack about any of this. And I'm not saying that you're going to be, but, you have that mentality when you do something from the beginning. You either kind of cut corners a little bit, or you go full OCD. You're probably wondering what the hell I'm talking about, but yeah, I'm just saying you need to be super fussy. So the alternative, probably the only alternative, is to use a splitter and place the splitter where it works for all of the cables. That's about the best you can do. So, maybe if you put the splitter in the middle of the radiator, the 2 outer cables will, and then if you rotate the fans right, you might be able to get, most of the cables to be the right length, but that's about the best you can do. And for me, fan cables are the most important ones to customize because they're always all different lengths, and I just hate rolling them up and trying to hide them. It's something that I would never do again. You know, even if people don't pay for it, I always customize all of the fan cables because I just cannot stand it if they're not. It is important, you know. And I always run them to a splitter so that I can have them. So, you know, the 4 or however many fans you have on your radiator, those cables are as short as possible, and then you have one running from there to, you know, the Aquero. Or it just depends how you're powering the fans. If they go into the motherboard, it's another way of kind of using up that length, but you're probably going to have to extend some of them. Yeah, there's really no way out of customizing them if you're going to be super fussy about it. Otherwise, you're going to be rolling up cable. Finally, non-Build 18 related, although it's been a while since you've worked in a 900D, Climb Build 24 came out just after this question. I'd like to modify my spare 900D to house a 560 in the basement and possibly roof. Any advice? I haven't tried that, but the case is definitely big enough for them to fit. And, you know, if the case is big enough, then you can make it happen. There's no doubt about that. Remove the drive base in the bottom of the 900D, remove all the rubbish down there, you know, the mounts and all the stuff that they have, and just install your own mounting systems. I'm not sure about the roof, you know, that would be a tight fit, I can tell you now. You'd have to cut the entire existing roof panel out and put your own panel in there. How long does Mayhem's UV blue EDC clear dye last in the system before it fades away? Jacob Sammy. I love Mayhem's. I've been using them for years. Their products are awesome. Client Build 5 is still running to this day without an issue, and the coolant has been in that loop for 6 years, okay? But the UV dye does not last very long. You'll notice it'll fade within 2 weeks. Keep a bottle, they're only cheap. There's enough in there to last you 6 months, maybe even a year, keeping the system beautiful and bright, but you do have to keep adding a little bit of dye every so often, probably once a month or so. So that was from Jacob Sammy. What's your opinion about 2 separate loops for one high-end setup? Pure aesthetic awesomeness or useful temperature-wise if money plays no role? P.S. When will we see the Singularity PC case lineup? Okay, 2 loops. I've done dual loops so many times. If money is not an object, then dual loops are important for temperatures, but only when you have, you know, when you're cooling more than, well, let's say 3 components. So yeah, I wouldn't cool more than 3 components in a loop. With the mono blocks that we have now, the fact that we're not using memory water blocks anymore, we have less GPUs now because it's been restricted to 2. A single loop is going to be more than enough for any system, any current system. So, but the thing about dual loops is it does give you the opportunity to make a really quiet system because your cooling capacity is absolute overkill, so you can turn those fans right down to almost nothing most of the time. That's the real benefit there. And as for the cases, I'm spending so much of my time on that right now. Okay, Penguin Airlines, great idea. I'm looking forward to this segment. Congrats on the Radium release. Thank you. I most enjoy seeing custom heat sinks, components that you machine as I used to fabricate parts back when I did some robotic design. Awesome. If there's any content you can make on the production of those parts without giving away any of your secrets to competitors, literally 2 days ago, a video was made on that exact thing that you would absolutely love to see. And check out Modding with Robots, which I uploaded recently. You guys can like see the future, eh? That was 4 weeks ago. That's amazing. How would you start to upgrade a system? What would you buy first? What would you use again? This mostly depends entirely on the system and the new components that are available, but it is a great question. The water cooling system I'd stick with as much as I could because at least, you know, the parts that I use, they'll last forever, 10, 15 years. So I won't upgrade any of that other than the water blocks, which you have to upgrade. But as for the core components, just, it depends on how far you want to go, how much money you have to spend. But yeah, I would just go for the best that I could with the money that I had for the core components. And case, stick with that. Stick with it, basically everything you can. Anything that's bottlenecking your system, absolutely. What's the best way to create 4-pin RGB extension cables? Are there companies who sell such extensions? What are the length of cables for the dark side RGB strips in this build and in Event Horizon? Akira Pilot. Yes, there are quite a lot of companies making these. I think IceMods has some now, but certainly Darkside, Aqua Computer has their own. And yeah, there are a few others, but building them custom, I don't actually have the connectors for that yet. I'm trying to source some, but that's something I would like to do. But Darkside, I'm pretty sure 15 centimeter, 30 centimeter, 60 centimeter. What do you only use EK water blocks in your builds? Oh, why do you? Sorry. I would like to see more SwiftTech builds or something instead of the boring old EK blocks. Yes, exactly. I would love to use something else, but there's a monopoly. There's not enough on the market. I've tried to use Bits Power and other things, but people don't trust new brands for a long time. It takes people a lot to change. And remember that it's never really my choice. Although in my own builds, I have used EK blocks, I admit. That is because I've tried to use other water blocks, but the other companies never have all of the water blocks that I need for the one build. And I don't want to go mixing and matching water blocks. It just looks terrible. So, if they have a CPU water block, but not the GPU water blocks that I need, then I just can't use their water blocks. That is the main reason. That is a very good question, though, or statement. Barticus, you wanted lots of questions. So, how are the raid card temps? Have you ever considered fabricating better solution for things like... Okay, that's the first question. I remember that everything in that build was just... The temps were amazing. They were the best I've seen. And I'm not just saying that because it's my water blocks, but I think it was roughly 35. It's been a while now. I'm surprised that I didn't record those temperatures, but... and put them in the build log. Have you ever considered fabricating a better solution for things like those hard drive cages? Maybe somehow incorporating all those SATA connectors into single multi-SATA? Oh, absolutely, yes. So dealing with the mess of SATA data cables, in client build 18, there was a hell of a lot of them. It was just insane. What we need is a splitter PCB, just like we have for fans, with a single cable running to it. You probably can't do that with, well, you can't do that with SATA, but maybe with some other connection. Especially since you have the knowledge to get stuff like that built. I'd buy a hard block SATA connector for K-slabs, hard drive cages in a heartbeat. Yeah, there are actually solutions out there for this. They call them a backplane. So if you want to search through what's available, just search hard drive or SATA backplane, and you'll probably find what you're looking for. But we do need better solutions. Absolutely, the solutions right now are very limited, terrible. And I haven't got much into electronics yet, but I do have those capabilities. It's something I would like to do in the future, but really it's all about funding. It's about saving up. It's about finding the time and the people. What are those little cable routing things on the RADs, and where do you get them? Okay, I pretty much get all of this stuff from Performance PCs. It's ModSmart. Just search ModSmart and you'll find, well, they have a lot of stuff, but in the cable management section on Performance PC, there is just an immense amount of cable management components. It's awesome. So yeah, I actually just bought a whole lot more of those things because I absolutely love them. How do you do all those how do all those Corsair fans sound? Do they have a nice noise profile? I ask because I just generally despise Corsair fans and stick to Gentle Typhoons, but I'm always open to options. At 100% RPM, they are insanely loud, just terribly loud, you know, and there is absolutely no need to have fans over 1500 RPM is even still too high. So I absolutely agree with you on that. It's not really a choice that I have, it's customer requests. I never really got into Gentle Typhoons though. It was mostly the colors, I don't know, but I kind of went with Noise Blocker instead, Noctua for a while. I'm talking about colors and I mentioned Noctua, but no, Noise Blocker I really like. But yeah, Gentle Typhoons are awesome. They are the best fans. But not my favorite fans because, you know, I like a balance of form and function. I feel like I should have said more, but anyway, moving on. I love temp sensors as much as you do, but I never see you mention flow rate sensors, which I also love. Any particular reason you wouldn't use those in a build this high end? Very good point, and this is a very important point. I'm a real minimalist. You know, minimalism is super important to me. If you have an Aquero and you've installed every kind of monitoring and control device under the sun, then why not have flow sensors? You're absolutely right. But the thing is, flow is not actually that important. I mean, of course it's important, but knowing flow is not that important. As long as the temperatures are right, that's the main thing. And temp sensors in the loop are not vital, but knowing where the bottleneck is in your loop is nice. It's something that's nice to know. And also, the reason I install them is usually for the Aquero, because I mean, the only way to set up fan curves is to base them on the coolant temp instead of the component temps. That is so important. So yeah, basically the answer is minimalism. I'll only install things that I really need, and temperatures are what is important. You know, if the flow is bad, the temperatures are going to be bad. So, but yeah, it would be a nice thing to have. I'll tell you what, if they release something super compact that you can hardly see, absolutely I'll install it. But the big bulky ones, you know, I just can't stand it. And some of them are very flow restrictive as well, which is surprising. It seems they're a flow meter. I have this question for a while, and you might be able to enlighten me. How do you address the ugliness of bare PCB ECC RAM with the raised middle chip? They are a nice feature on my personal workstation, but they get my OCD going. Sketch 1994. Not much you can really do, other than like a custom heatsink or something, I guess. Hopefully this works the way you hope. I don't have a question, but a suggestion for the weekly vlogs. I know you like your videos to be organized and thought out, but I think you're talking about giving your thoughts on, describing what is being shown, etc. would be much more interesting than just a video with music over it. I'll watch either way, thanks. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's what I've been doing forever. But I've kind of been experimenting a bit lately, because I do often get a lot of people complaining that I talk too much and drone on. So then I'm just, all right, screw it. I'll talk less and I'll do a video with, you know, more B-roll and music. But yeah, I'm just kind of trying to find a balance at this point. But yeah, thank you for your advice. Great idea, the QA section. I'm going to build my first liquid-cooled PC. So let me join other users asking you how you set the Aquero 6 fan curves based on temp range, etc. Plus, in previous episodes, you talk about temp sensors for both loops and Aquero connection. Which part of both loops do you suggest to place the temp sensors in? Reservoir, pump, tops, or the radiator? It doesn't actually matter where you place the temp sensors. The coolant moves so quickly through the loop, mainly these days with the components that we now have, that it doesn't heat up, through any section of the loop. It heats up gradually after many revolutions of the loop as a whole. So it doesn't matter where you place it. I just find a port that is going to be out of the way of the flow. You really need to consider that. It's very important because the temp sensors stick out quite a bit. And there's some ports, like if you installed it on a GPU or something, it would really restrict or completely block the flow. So I install it in a port on a pump top that's not being used, like a deep port where it's not impinging on the flow. So that's the main thing to me. Also, it must be hidden as much as possible. Things like that shouldn't be seen. That was from Purple83. What about a live stream while you're building a system? Definitely. You can show us exactly how you do things and can directly answer our questions, and we have the option to donate so you can show us more of your great work. I'm going to be completely honest with you. There is only one thing from stopping me from doing this, and I'm not complaining, but I have to tell you what it is. It's my illness. I do plan on doing this, and I will, because I plan on overcoming this. I guess it's a fear. But I'm often in extreme pain, and right now I am, and it's starting to affect my concentration. If I did that, I would have to not do a normal build log for the system. And that's kind of why I haven't done it yet. That's the main reason. But yeah, being on camera, while I'm building, people would have to understand why I'm so, serious, and I don't know. I think people will learn to, will understand me. So I think it'll be all right. Have you struggled to keep Singularity Computers successful throughout the time it's been going, or has it always been plain sailing? I would think it would be difficult to sell extremely high-end water-cooled builds. The Team Fortress TF2 laboratory. Absolutely. Most of the time it has been a real struggle. There was a time, probably 2 years, when it was smooth sailing. It was great. But, then I had somebody scam me, and since then it's been really, really difficult again. Yeah, it's high stakes. It's one mistake and it costs you a fortune. It's a very, very difficult business to be in, and yeah, it's been an incredible challenge from the start just to stay afloat. It's a dream, What are your favorite fans? That's a really good question, because I find this with a lot of components that I'm just not happy with anything that is on the market, and that's what's driven me to go and build my own components. But I would say still noise blocker. I've been using them for years. It's mostly the aesthetics, but also the specs. They're spot on. 1200 RPM for me, great fan. And they still manage to have good static pressure and CFM. Even at the lower RPM, very quiet, beautiful looking fan. They're a premium fan. So yeah, I'd probably say noise blocker, but Steve Sells, do you spend a lot of time working out the layout of everything and the color scheme beforehand, or is it just trial and error? Just wondering if halfway through a build you think, shit, that won't work. I'll have to scrap that and do it again. What about making mistakes on modded cases? Do you have to get two just in case? Yeah, it's a very good question. For the first 5 years or so, yes, I would make mistakes, and I wasn't happy with things, and I'd go back and change them, and I would go through a couple of cases to do mods. But when you do it every day like I do, I never have a holiday, I never take time off, I don't take weekends off. I'm always doing this, I live it. You get to the point where you just see a case and you can just see the whole layout already. And you already know what you're doing right from that point. But I don't like to think about my builds, before I receive the components. I often get customers who push and say, I want this and I want that. and I just say, look, just wait until we get the parts, because I have to see the parts, I have to get a feel for them, I have to have them laid out, and then I just think it through over like a 15-minute period, and it just all falls into place, and then boom, it's perfect. You know, every time now. With modded cases, it's a little bit different. There is still a bit of trial and error, I have to be honest. Modding is not easy, and mistakes do get made. You know, it's usually measurements or something that wasn't double checked. You know, I didn't test fit properly, and I find at the end, like the paint thickness has changed things and things don't fit anymore. So yeah, modding is absolute trial and error. And I still do go through the occasional second case, but you know, that only happens if I'm absolutely gutting a case and tearing it to pieces. But no, that probably hasn't happened for about 4 or 5 years, I guess. My only question is, who on earth actually needs a workstation like that? It's a sweet machine, but doesn't seem like a responsible business expense. I'm sure whoever commissioned it is self-employed, because I don't see anyone being able to justify that sort of workstation to an employer. Yaro Kassir. If you have to ask the question, well then it's just all lost on you. It's important that humans create things and express themselves, because that's where the ideas and the technology comes from that ends up changing the world. So it may seem pointless and it may seem like toys, but really it's not. And yeah, just so you know, this build had an amazing purpose and it was put to incredible use, but I want to actually leave that to the client if he wants to talk about it. But there was a very specific purpose for this build, and it was built, you know, very specifically for something. Not just a project, specific question, more of a general one, though mostly for lols. How friendly are you with your primary contacts from your primary suppliers? I imagine a lot of back and forth trying to get parts, DOA returns, etc. And how rare are those friendly, knowledgeable types? Listen and understand rather than look through a cheat sheet constantly. Mostly they know who I am, even though I don't say who I am. And so they kind of look after me and treat me like I'm some kind of god or something. I'm not egotistical, so I don't care about that stuff. But yeah, it's good for someone like me. But I don't usually get special treatment. But yeah, I haven't really come across any difficult people. But yeah, I mostly have to pay full price. A couple of people have given me discounts here and there, but not much. Best pump reservoir for 2017. Oh God, conflicts of interest. You gotta hate it. For me, it's not a conflict of interest because I'm an enthusiast and I love all of the tech. I don't care whose it is, but other people are definitely going to see it that way. I really like the new heat killer tube. I think that's unique. Anything unique, I don't even care if it's not a great product. If they've done a unique design, something a little bit different, then, it's awesome. But I would say out of those, I would say that BitsPower has taken a step down with their new system. I don't actually like it as much as the old one, I have to be honest. I think that they've kind of cut costs a bit. EK Extras. I spend so much of my time sanding off the ends of the reservoir tube to get the caps to face the directions I want them to face. It just frustrates me. The Aqualis I haven't used much, but beautiful, stunning quality. Monsoon MMRS, unique, great ideas, but no, I can't see any flaws with it. I do like it, but it's very, very industrial. It's only for a specific aesthetic. But I do like it a lot. I don't know, I'm an enthusiast. I love them all. So in the particular workstation build, did you think about airflow throughout the case? If you did, how is this set up? This is always a subject that I briefly talk about in my build logs. Like I always have a section where I cover the airflow, the thermal design. But I have a couple of rules that I always stick to, and it's great to see that these rules have filtered out and everyone's doing it now. Number one, convection. Never forget it. It's a powerful force. Do not work against convection. It's just, going to be very inefficient. Just because it's invisible doesn't mean that it's, it's not there. People just seem to forget about it, out of sight, out of mind. The other one is positive pressure to keep the dust out. Wherever you have filters, or your intakes should be filtered. There should be more intakes than exhaust. But yeah, there's a hell of a lot more to it than that, which I'd love to go into. That's from Eric Hellman. Stefan Astrom, you got me hooked on custom systems, including sleeving and so forth. That's awesome. The largest problem I have is finding a crimp plier for USB and fan connectors. I don't want to spend $200 on pliers. Hell yeah, I know what you mean. IceMods actually happens to have the best crimper I have ever used. I can't remember what he calls it, but I think it's the only one on his site. Just check out IceMods. I'll put a link in the video description to it. That's what I'll do. So keep an eye out for that. But yeah, they're cheap and they do all of the different pin sizes. They have 3 different sizes. They're the ones that I use. So you might have seen them. They have blue handles. But there are a couple of them with blue handles, so you need to be careful. And there are also a few tricks to actually getting them to work properly, such as loosening off the clamp so that it floats freely. A lot more to that, which I'd love to talk about as well. David Cross, what have you done to the components that have been replaced? I sold them to recover some funds for the customer. I remember in one of your recent videos, you talked about how you ran the PWM signal of the fans off the temp of the coolant. How do you put that together? I'm getting ready to build a dual loop in the H440 using your reservoir mount, of course. Thanks very much. 100% of the profits from our products go towards this channel. And I would really like to do the same in the GPU loop. I poked around in Google and performance PCs, but never really found a solid guide or answer. I'm using PWM fractal Venturi fans, by the way. Okay, so you are talking about doing what I did in Client Build 18, setting up a fan curve based on temperatures. The best way to do this is with the Aquero. But there are some motherboards that do have these features. Well, most motherboards have these features now. It's just that they don't work very well and it's very limited. But you can actually go into the BIOS. If you connect all of your fans to the motherboard, the only problem is with most motherboards, you're only going to be able to run it off the CPU temp or something like that, not actually the coolant temp. Unless the motherboard has onboard temp sensors, then you can do it. But otherwise, you're going to need the Aquero. And I'm going to talk about this in an upcoming video and explain how the whole thing works. But you need temp sensors, Aquero, and you need to have your fans and the temp sensors connected to the Aquero. You need to have all the software set up. It's a lot to talk about. Any thoughts on the new Barrow fittings and other water cooling components they make? Would you use any of them? If so, can you name any specifically? Matthew Ustad, I have to be honest about Barrow. When I first saw their early components, I have always really liked Bits Power. And I've never liked people who copy anything. If you're going to release something, it might as well be something new, unique. You need to have something new to offer to the market, new and exciting. They did offer them at a much lower price, and I understand Bits Power's products are very expensive. The fittings are insanely expensive. So a lot of people went for it, but I do see the early stuff as just straight up copies. But, they are starting to get into more unique stuff now. So, yeah, nothing wrong with it. I think they make great products. I really don't have a problem with them at all. But I don't like copying. What compressor and HVLP guns do you use for painting? What have you used in the past? Do you have any experience using LVLP guns for painting? What is the biggest difference in finish, amount of work, etc. using a high CFM compressor and high-end HVLP guns compared to LVLP, especially when applied to computer component painting as opposed to automotive? You may have already answered these in previous videos, but I don't remember. Yeah, I don't like HVLP guns so far. And the gun that I use is Devolbis GTI Pro. It's not the HVLP version. I can actually get a HVLP nozzle for it. But no one taught me how to paint. I learned how to paint just completely by feel, by trial and error. And that's the way I really like to learn, because once you learn that way, you know, you can do anything. I can almost paint in the dark because I do it by feel. So yeah, I'm really stuck with the guns that I've learned how to use, and I love the Devolbis GTI Pro with the current config that it has, non-HVLP 1.2mm nozzle. I do also have a primer gun that is HVLP and it has a 2mm nozzle, but I haven't had good results with it. You know, I end up getting too much orange peel on the primer, which then shows up later and makes a mess. So I end up thinning down my primer and just using the 1.2mm, which not a lot of people really do, but it works for me with computer components. But I admit I have a lot more to learn about painting. I love painting. I want to learn more. What is the difference between a single and dual rotary? If you take a look at the fitting, there are, well, some fittings, so there's like a 90-degree single rotary, a 90-degree dual rotary. Well, the difference is the rotating sections. So the single rotary has 2 halves that rotate. Dual rotary has 3 sections that all rotate. Basically, you know, single rotary is a single join which rotates. Dual rotary is 2 joins that rotate, and then there's triple rotaries and so on. Man, am I going to get through all of these, because we've been going a long time. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this new, different type of content. Remember that none of this would be possible without our patrons.